Welcome to Podcast Done For You, the show where we make it as easy as possible for you to make the right choices to advance your podcasting career. So let's get started on the show. The question of today, starting a podcast on YouTube, what matters? Well, that's our objective here on Podcast Done For You. We're going to make it as simple as possible for you to get all of the information that you need so you can get your podcasts up and running. Of course, if you would just like to sit back, relax, and have a podcast done for you, we're here to do that for you as well. Where the opportunity presents itself, we simply create everything for you. We even anchor the program, and you can check that out on our YouTube channel for Podcasts Done For You. And it's fitting that we mention that because we want to talk about podcasting on YouTube. Now, you may be watching this with some degree of knowledge or very little degree of knowledge. So let me give you a little bit of a background. And what we're going to do today is to talk to you about how simple it is to get it up and running and why it actually matters. So first things first, podcasts on YouTube are a relatively new thing. Now, I say that in that YouTube has, of course, been around for a number of years. And what is really clear is that there is a difference between being a YouTuber and being a podcaster. Now, what is that fundamental difference? Well, it is the expectation around visually what you're going to present. Now, traditionally, YouTubers, although they may be sitting there talking to camera much like I am, there's usually a lot of other things that are going on for you. On the screen, it is a visual enticement. Now, podcasts are not that. Podcasts come from the audio based. And those of you that may have watched a podcast here on YouTube, or perhaps even on one on syndicated on a television, depending on where you're watching from, well, the one thing about them is usually one or two people sitting around a studio talking to one another. Sometimes they've got headphones on. Sometimes you can see the microphone. My microphone is right here below where you can't quite see it. Don't need to wear headphones, particularly if I'm talking only to myself. That is pretty much all that you see visually. So the question really remains, do you actually need to have the video? Well, here's the thing. If you can have it, it's fantastic. If you don't think you can have it, or it's a difficult thing for you to pull off because there are a number of reasons why, and we get into that in a different video that we've put together about audio versus video. The real thing is you don't really need it. And that's an important thing to understand on the platform that we're here talking about. What really matters on YouTube is video. It doesn't make the most difference because the expectation of a podcast, as I was saying, is relatively low. So people are not expecting you to have much in the way of video. So do it, don't do it. That is actually up to you. Now, what I would say is what really matters on YouTube are the basics. Okay, so if you are going to have video, you do want to set up some kind of background. Now, whether you use a virtual background or a real background, again, that's something we'll look at in future episodes. But for now, let's assume that you've got some kind of background that is reasonable to put up there if you are using video. Of course, if you're using audio only, it doesn't matter. Now, what does matter is the quality of the microphone. So making sure you've got a decent microphone happening. Again, we're not going to go into that right now because that's a separate video that we've talked all about microphones. But we want to establish what are the other things that really matter when it comes to YouTube. So first of all, establishing your own channel. That is a must. It's very easy to do. I'm not going to walk you through the basics of how to do that. There are plenty of videos out there which will tell you how to do that if you want that sort of step-by-step advice, but you need to establish a channel. Now, once you've established that channel, and I suggest you use a name that relates back to your business or what the podcast is going to be about, which should be something similar, then the next step for you to do is to simply load the podcast. Now, once you've created, of course. Now, the That doesn't mean that you shouldn't be putting the podcast on all the other platforms. You absolutely should be doing that. Now, if it is an audio-based podcast only, you can feed into YouTube that podcast feed as you do publish it on all of the other channels. So if you're a beginner and you're just starting out and looking for free tools, as we've spoken about before, Spotify for podcasters is out there. It is a free tool. It's not the tool that I use anymore these days. I think there are better tools and paid for tools. Again, we'll talk about that at another point, but just to say that I'm using Captivate, and like Captivate, many other platforms of similar nature, what they will do is give you an RSS feed. The RSS feed is what you can simply put into YouTube. It's a very simple step to do. YouTube, in setting it up, will ask you for the feed, for the RSS feed, and you simply put that, copy and paste that in, and away you go. So you do need to have a platform that you're launching or you're publishing the podcast from everywhere else. Now, of course, if you are using video, you simply load the video up into YouTube as you would do any other video. Now, I'm assuming for the moment that you've all out there have loaded a video before. There is a Create Studio button, and you simply follow the instructions in there and load your video. It's a pretty step-by-step, easy process to do that. The things that really matter then once you've done those basics and you've loaded it, and I should say, again, if you are doing video and you have loaded it to YouTube, that does not preclude you from taking that audio and publishing that audio on all the other podcast platforms. I encourage you to do that. But in getting the basics and understanding what the other things are that really matter in the podcast on YouTube, it's really about understanding why YouTube actually matters. It's a very interesting play by Google to step away from Google Podcasts and just rely on YouTube. The thing about it is YouTube differentiates itself in the market. So I'm going to hesitate and say for a moment that the reason that you have found this particular video is more likely because you've searched for it. And we've come up, which is fantastic. Now, what I challenge you on is, would you jump onto Spotify or Apple or any of the other podcast platforms that you may like and actually search for content? You might be searching for a podcast that someone's told you about and a person or a brand, but it's not likely that you search just for content. That is usually the domain of a proper search engine, and we've come to rely on YouTube being that. That's why Google owns it. It is a search engine of its own, and a very powerful one at that. So the value is that when you put content up on YouTube, it's searchable long term. Now, that doesn't mean your content is not searchable long term on a Spotify, for example. It's just that people aren't using it that way, whereas people are using it that way here. So what tends to happen, and you think about your own habits on Spotify or Apple or anywhere else, is if you found a podcast, you might go back and 2 or 3 episodes prior, unless someone has specifically told you about an episode. Otherwise, you're pretty much listening to the latest episode, which is fine. There is a place for that. But when you also want your content to be found longer term, why not put it here on YouTube? That's why what matters is getting some of the content right. Now, this is a work in progress for us. We're not going to claim to be the world's greatest experts on it because things are always changing. But there are the basics that you need to get in there. Choose the right title for your YouTube video. Now, make sure that it's something that resonates. The great thing about having a search engine as a place to where you put it is that search engine provides you with information. When I went to put together the title for this episode, I went to YouTube and I started typing in certain things that I thought might resonate. I waited to find what would come up for people, and so comes up the title for this particular episode. And that's where we fit it in. And there isn't another video that has this particular title, but there clearly are people that are searching for this. Hence, that's why you found it, right? So That is a really important part of it. It also is important at the start of your video, in that first 15 seconds, to make sure you re-mention the title, the thing that people are really searching for. So get that in very early on in the piece before you then get into the rest of it. The next thing to do is to make sure that you've got a decent description. And that is all auto-generated these days if you want it to be. There are many, many ways that you can do that. If you are editing on a platform like Descript, for example, it's going to give you all the options to find those things out. If you are just doing it on whatever local tool you have, well, you can always pick up the transcript and put it into your favorite AI tool and ask for it to give you a summary. You can even ask for it to give you a podcast style summary. Experiment with that. Again, depends on which AI platform you are using. Now, I don't have any qualms about using an AI platform for this sort of thing, because I know there can be concerns about privacy and who owns the information once you put it into the likes of ChatGPT. What I can tell you is you're putting a podcast out there, well, that is public domain information anyway, so go ahead and use it and pick up whichever tool best suits you. But you want a short description that gets to the point and entices people to want to watch what is in the rest of the video. Now, the other things that are important to remember and what really matters for YouTube is also creating some chapters. Again, if you have tools like Descript, and I'm sure there are plenty of others that do this as well, those chapters can be created fairly easily by using their built-in tools. If you don't have that sort of facility, well, what you are really talking about doing here is literally the idea, as you would in a book, breaking things up into certain sections. It means that people can jump ahead into different areas of the video very, very easily. And so it is a really important thing because sometimes people want just a very basic thing. For example, if I start talking right now about, say, what is the end credit that you need to put on there? If we're going to have a section about end credits and that's all people are interested in, then having a chapter called end credits will allow people to quickly jump to that and find what they are looking for. So we're not going to fool you. Even though we weren't really to talk about end credits, I'm going to talk to you about end credits. Make sure you have something at the end which really tells people to subscribe to your channel. You want to focus people on YouTube, bringing people everywhere in. I'm actually in favor these days of, yes, it's nice to be getting people to like and comment on their favorite podcast platform. But to be honest, I'd rather invest most of my opportunity around here on YouTube. So do me a favor. You have come along here. Don't wait to get to the end credit. Just subscribe to the Podcast Done For You channel right below. We'd love you to do that. And if you'd love to, put in a comment. Share it with other people as well. We always welcome your feedback. So that's the end credits. And that's the reason why we have chapters, again, so you can jump to those different things. Don't put, when it comes to end credits as well, don't put too many calls to action. In fact, keep to one. Ideally, that's all I want you to do. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Now, if you want more information, of course, there are show notes, and that's the next important thing to be aware of. You want to have show notes just like you do with any other podcast, and that goes across all platforms. Now, those of you who might be familiar with other podcast platforms will know that there are show notes available there. Again, if you have something like Captivate, or if you're indeed using Spotify for podcasters, you'll be able to push those show notes universally across everywhere. One of the important things to put in there is information about how people can get in contact with you, what you want them to do, anything important that has come out from the video itself, so people can engage further. So you will see in the show notes here, the podcastdoneforyou.com.au webpage where you can find out all the information about getting a podcast done for you, including links on how to book an appointment with me to discuss a plan for you that is personalized and tailored. So that's the little ad for Podcast Done For You out of the way. So what else matters? Well, really not too much else. We can talk about tags and SEO. Now, tags and SEO are important to put in there, as you would have dealt with on things like various social media platforms. Now, let's be honest here. Some of this is a bit hit and miss. There are plenty of so-called experts out there who are going to tell you what to do. Now, I'm not denying there are a lot of things that you can do when it comes to this, but I would encourage you to get started first. What really matters are those basics that we have gone through. You can always go back and you can add more tags and you can add more so-called SEO style content into the future. But if you fundamentally have chosen the right topic that you know that people want to hear about because you've used the search engine to find it, if you have published it and you have put it together reasonably professionally, then you're going to have something that people will attach to. Again, what I would say to you in far as professionalism is concerned is that it is all about the level that you want to take it to. Now, it's not difficult to achieve what I'm achieving here today, but I'm not trying to be a YouTuber. That's what we said at the beginning. This is a podcast. There is no more expectation than that. So whether you have been listening or watching, that is something that you need to think about. I didn't make anything particularly happen on screen here for you during the course of this podcast that you couldn't gain from simply just listening to it. So it's important to remember that the basics are what is really fundamental to getting your YouTube channel up and running and to getting your YouTube podcast up and running. What I would say is, again, we can do it all for you, but if you want to do it yourself, it's not that difficult in terms of the basics. The hard part is, what are you going to talk about? Once you have the topic, do you know how you're going to deliver it? Can you deliver 15, 20 minutes, for example, just as I have, talking straight to camera? Do you want it to be an interview style? If you want it to be an interview style program, then you have that other added thing to think about is, where are those people going to be? Who's going to bring those people in? Are you still going to be the expert or are you just going to be the interviewer? These are questions that you are more broadly about podcasts rather than the basics here, so we're not going to explore them any further now. We will talk to them in future episodes. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Podcast Done For You. As I said before, please hit the subscribe button below. We'd love you to do that. We'd love you to comment if you enjoyed what this was about. And if you want us to explore anything further to help you get your podcast up and running, please let us know in the comments. Until next time, this is the Podcast Done For You show.